You know, there comes a point in every man's life where he needs to finally grow up and admit to himself that doing a mic check before running an episode of the YouTube series that he's doing is necessary. Now, I mean, for it to have happened once, it's pretty bad. But, for it to have happened twice, uh, well, not as great. Anyway, I'm doing some post audio this time around for this episode that I literally just recorded because I realized that I did not have my mic turned on, so it should still turn out fine. What I will say is, knowing in advance, this is a very exciting episode. The first 6 minutes notwithstanding, because we're going over things like just trying to find like what items we might want to purchase in the near future, or if there's anything that's really going for us, and something that is kind of strategic in Beneath the Stolen Lands is this idea that every time you kill an elite enemy in a room, you unlock a new item or two at the shop, and then these items are cumulative over your following runs. So the strategy there is that, like, I think over time, certain classes, fighters especially come to mind, are kind of not very good early on because there are only going to be a small number of weapons available. But what you can do is when you have unlocked a couple of good like end game weapons, like +4, +5 weapons, you can actually build towards those weapons because you know that they're going to be there for you in your shop. Um, so just something that you can consider that's very strategic about this mode. And here we're looking at this item, the Gloves of Dueling, which is very much a part of that. The Gloves of Dueling specifically give +2. They give you a +4 to resisting disarm checks, which is good. But the best part is that it gives you a +2 to your weapon training bonus, which is attack and damage for an entire weapon group, just by virtue of having it. So, like, that's really strong. So, like, in a future run, if I were to run a fighter, I would know that that item's there in my shop, and I can actually use it to my advantage. And basically, what we do here is we spend about 3 minutes trying to find, an item that would maybe be something that would be kind of an improvement for us, but overall, what we find is that there just isn't really anything available, unfortunately. And we of course go to the dragon. Now the dragon, I didn't know this at first, does actually sell some magical items, but they're all going to be like accessories, uh, not main armor or weapon pieces and stuff like that. So I mean, it's interesting to me that they really have managed to make this like a roguelike, where you mainly have to rely on the items that you find in your run, but there are shops as well that can actually get you very useful items, in some cases, perhaps run-winning items. I know in my other file I managed to pick up a +3 full plate from the shop I think at about 6th level, 7th level, which is a lot earlier than you would normally find that kind of equipment. So having that armor bonus made the run a lot easier up to the point where I currently am. I believe I just hit 10th level on that run. So it is what it is. As far as this party goes, I think that we're in a really good position, though. We've got a really strong offense, just because of the sheer number of physical attacks that we're able to put out every round. And so our action economy, to use a specific term here, is actually quite good, just because we have so many attacks per round. We're rolling a lot of dice. And in a lot of cases, we actually outnumber the enemies that we're going up against, which means that we're getting more turns per round than our enemies are, which is always a good thing in turn-based combat. Even though this isn't turn-based, it's real time with pause. There's still that turn-based aspect to it. Now, that being said, where this party does start to run into some issues is that we really need to be careful about our survivability. This party is far from being a glass cannon party, right? Like, it's not like we don't have a lot of hit points, don't have a lot of AC, stuff like that. Where we are weak is that if our front line starts to collapse, um, it can get very bad for us very quickly. And to kind of counteract that, we're actually relying on our sorcerer to bring up some like cleric spells, things like a cleanse, which heals you as per like a cure serious wound spell and removes like a lot of status effects, as well as like break enchantment spells in the event that somebody gets confused, held, dominated, etc. Basically, we're just trying to open up our options. We also don't have a lot of crowd control in this party. We rely solely on just doing like tons and tons and tons of damage. Our crowd control comes from the fact that we have 3 animal companions that are in the front, taking a lot of damage for us. Now, I won't realize this until a little bit later into the episode, but I actually forgot to give 5th level spells to our Druid, not for 1, but for 2 full levels, and that's pretty bad. Because 5th level spells, one of them is like animal growth, I think it's called. It gives like a +8 to strength, constitution, or +8 to strength, +4 to constitution, +2 natural armor to animal companions, which obviously is just really, really strong. But I mean, there's a lot. I'm really sad I lost the audio for this, because this was a lot of fun to play. These floors get a lot rougher, and we're really hitting the point where the game can truly be considered like difficult. And we actually run into some trouble here in a bit. So now, of course, we have to go through our party buffs. Hard to get around that. It's just this kind of party. It's what you need to do. In some other parties, it's actually more useful to, instead of just buffing the entire party, like, all at once, to cast more, like, timely spells. So, like, you know, instead of having a wizard cast, like, Communal Stone Skin, having a wizard cast, like, you know, instead, like, a 5th level spell that completely shuts down an entire room, like Confusion or something like that, or a Fireball that just does, like, 1 billion damage. Those are the kinds of things that you want to look for. And really, in having a balanced party, what the kinds of things we're looking for in a balanced party, quote-unquote, is that our casters are really doing the bulk of the work, and the damage that the, if you want to call it a DPS, classes like Rogue, Slayer, Ranger, and the amount of damage that like the frontline, like Fighter or Barbarian or whatever is doing, they do a lot of damage, but really it's the casters that are winning every combat just by virtue of controlling enemies, you know, debuffing them, making it impossible for them to do stuff, or just making your party indestructible as well, which is kind of what the strategy that we have going on in this run. I am quite pleased. I kind of just did this party composition as like, not a joke, but like, it just like as a fun, like, themed party where, you know, we're not really trying too awful hard to make something broken, and it ends up being really, really strong. Now, in this room, we've actually got a elite enemy, a Dread Zombie Cyclops, and it's pretty rough. Whenever, just always be on the lookout when you're going into rooms, especially if the enemies haven't noticed you yet. Always be sure to cast buffs on yourself if you can before the enemies actually activate, because then you know, the buffs aren't taking time to cast. This is when I realized that I didn't have any 5th level spells memorized, by the way. 2 full levels we went without doing that, and it really just goes to show like how strong this run is in general. Just kind of showing that, like, wow, I didn't even need those spells to succeed. So it's a good feeling for sure, knowing that we didn't really need all of that in the first place. We kind of swap around some spells here as well, because we're finally at a level where we can cast a Greater Magic Fang, and that would give like a +2 attack and damage to all of our animal companions, which is very strong for obvious reasons. It's like giving, you know, a +2 magical sword to Fighter, for example, if you can just do that. Interestingly enough, there's supposed to be a spell called Magic Weapon in Pathfinder that does the same thing that Magic Fang does for animal companions, but it does it for characters in your party. And the thing that sucks about it not being in the game is that fighters are really at a disadvantage without that spell, because it's kind of a synergy between you know, arcane casters and fighters, that if the fighter has a favored weapon, you know, like a weapon spec weapon, that they're able to actually get Magic Weapon on their weapon of choice rather than having to just use whatever's handy. And I say a lot of disparaging things about the fighter in this, because fighter is honestly one of my favorite classes in the game. We got a really nice crit for 53 there. That feels good. Really just showing the strength of the Falchion off. But anyway, it makes you sad because, like, I really like fighters, and fighters were already kind of a questionable class in terms of strength anyway in Pathfinder. And so knowing that they're worse in Kingmaker than they are in the tabletop. It just makes me really sad. So that's why I talk about it a lot. And I think a lot of people like the fighter class just because it's cool that it's just this, weapons expert who doesn't need magic, who is just really, really good with weapons, and that's it, and that's all there is to it. It's not like a paladin where you have spells and you bless your weapon and stuff. The barbarian has his rage, obviously. Um, Ranger has like magic and like naturey stuff. So the fighter is just kind of like classic in that sense, where like he's just a really strong like physical powerhouse of skill. Now, what we found on that Dread Cyclops was a scroll of Dragonkin, which literally transforms us into a dragon, and I am very excited about this. And I honestly think that this is like the coolest part of this whole run is about to come up when we finally activate that scroll. And we'll see what that looks like in a bit. It's hilarious. It causes all kinds of issues, but I don't even care because it's just so cool. But we'll get there when we get there. For the time being, we're still just critting everything with our falchion. I think we got 2-3 crits in there in that one fight with the falchion. Very, very strong weapon. On high strength characters especially, when our... even on a ×2 critical hit modifier, with a falchion, we're just doing so much damage because we're always getting critical hits. That being said, like using ×3 crit modifier weapons as a barbarian are also really scary, just because like when you get that ×3, it does so much damage that usually whatever enemy you're fighting is going to be dead like instantly, right? And that's the kind of thing that I always look for is just like when it comes to critical hits and understanding them, you can't count on them. As I said in a previous episode, you don't want to count on critical hits as a part of your strategy. But when you make them more consistent, when you make them more possible, they become an important part of the party. Now, this is just hilarious because we've got a dragon, that we have blur on, and we have mirror images on. And it's just taking up, like, the whole screen, all on its own. And I'm just so tickled by this. I love this. Like, this is so cool, like, in the tabletop, right? And so, seeing it come to life and seeing, like, a polymorph into a literal dragon is just, like, the coolest thing. And I know, it's like the classic nerd thing. It's like, I want to be a dragon. Like, it's easy to make fun of, but, like, oh, man, it's just so cool. I really like it. And this is just one of those things that I love about this game is, like, you don't see this kind of stuff in a lot of RPGs anymore, I don't think, where characters are literally turning into dragons because they're really good at magic. And that's really what makes this so special to me. It's just the ability to actually have done this, and we get a breath weapon as a result of changing into a dragon. What I find, I get a lot of information from this transformation though, that may be of use for those who are thinking of building into something like this. So minimum you have to be 6th level before you're able to do this, and the thing about it is it only gives you a +4 to strength, +4 to con, and then like a +4 to your natural armor bonus as well. So the stats are good, but the weird thing about it is that it almost seems like it's not really meant to be used in melee so much as it's meant to be used for like, for example, to keep the caster in the back, but now the caster is bigger, more well armored, has more health, and can do a breath weapon. And so really it almost feels like the polymorph spells are meant to be used to like keep the caster safe, more so than they are to actually be like a primary form of dealing damage. Really, to get the most out of polymorphing, you have to have a character that is already skilled in that kind of combat. And so for that role, if you're looking to build towards it specifically, you really want to get Eldritch Knight or Dragon Disciple to get the most out of it. Dragon Disciple, of course, gives you a large bonus to it, but you have to be a sorcerer, which means that you're able to you have to wait like a level or two. I can actually be 2 levels longer before you can actually cast Dragonkin as compared to normal. So you have to be like 14th level before you're even able to cast Dragonkin as a Dragon Disciple, which is really unfortunate because that's kind of the whole point of the build, is to turn into a dragon, and you can't even do it till 14th level, which in the regular campaign is like forever into the game. Like you're most of the way done with the game at that point. But in this game, in Beneath the Stolen Lands, it actually is a little bit more achievable, so it's not quite as bad. Now that being said, the Eldritch Knight path also works just because you can go Wizard. So you can actually be doing this as early as like, I want to say either 11th or 12th level, just depending on when. I forget if Eldritch Knight. I think it takes a level away from your casting, so it would be at 12th level. But that's that's 2 full levels sooner than what a sorcerer can do. And the other thing about this, like building towards a dragon build like this in general, is you really just have to predict that you're going to need a lot of strength, and you're going to need a decent amount of constitution as well. Just because if you are going to be in the front trying to do damage that way, you're going to need a lot of like health and stuff like that. The thing is, even being able to do this, you're not able to like out damage melee classes without taking significant hits to your overall character design. So I mean, now there's a reason for all this, of course, why it's just flat out worse than fighters, and that's because in 3.5 and Pathfinder. Well, sorry, in 3.5, not Pathfinder, because obviously this is Pathfinder. In 3.5, which Pathfinder is based off of, that version of Dungeons & Dragons, when you polymorphed, you literally just turned into the creature that you, like, cast a spell for. So when you polymorphed into a dragon, you literally just became a dragon, and that was a problem for a lot of reasons, because it really brought up the question of, like, why even play a fighter when I can just be a wizard, turn into a dragon, and I'm better than a fighter. And obviously, Pathfinder has taken great steps to actually fix that. Really glad to see it. For as imbalanced as parts of this game are, I really feel like Pathfinder in general is just a really balanced experience once you know what you're doing and looking for. There are just so many aspects to it as well, which I really, really love. Like it's more complicated than a lot of like cRPGs out there, which I really like. And this fight, I think, is where things get really nasty for us. Our dog actually goes down, and unfortunately, I wasn't paying attention. This is actually an acid form, so even though I cast my breath weapon, it does nothing. One advantage of watching this in like retrospect, though, that's really nice, is that I can actually kind of pay more attention to what's going on, which is pretty nice. Now, we talked a lot about like wild shaping, polymorphing our druid, and I'm kind of running into the same issue that I'm finding with like arcane casters, where like it sounds really cool in theory, but in practice it isn't as useful or powerful as you might think. And as a result, it's just almost not worth the risk to send your casters into the front, just to be able to, use those polymorphing spells. Because the thing is, if you're a divine caster, if your druid is like the healer of the party, and they wild shape and they die as a result of being in the front line, that feels terrible, because now your healer is lost, and you weren't even really getting that much out of it when you could have like been in the back casting like control type spells anyway. So it really is risky. You have to be very careful with how you actually take on these kinds of fights. And this is another situation that is really poor for us. We don't really have that much firepower left. We should have rested before coming into this room, but I was feeling lazy. I didn't want to lose my Dragonkin bonus, like the spell, since we do only have that as a scroll at the moment. But this fight ends up being really nasty for us as a result. And I'll show you exactly what I mean once we get unpaused here. So, didn't know that there was a second mana core in the room. Didn't know that there was a Hydra in the corner. And really, that just makes this fight really, really nasty. We hit 3 of them with a controlled fireball. But, I mean, we really just need to cast a second one here. And in the meantime, our dog is on his own again. It's a miracle that he lives through this fight, because this could have gone really, really poorly for us. And you'll notice as I'm going along here that I'm getting more and more careful with the fights, because even on normal, around this level, you really need to be taking the fights turn by turn and taking the enemies seriously. We've been cruising through this game so far. Somebody even commented about how like it's kind of boring just because it's so easy. But the thing is, it kind of starts to not be easy. I think our bear actually goes down in this fight as well. This is just a really, really nasty fight for us here. Barbarian's starting to take damage. Our stone skin is starting to wear out, as you can tell, just because we're actually taking lots and lots of damage now. More to the point, though, even if our stone skin hasn't run out, like on our barbarian, we're just taking so much acid damage that it's just going right through, you know? And with every head doing like 3d6 acid damage or whatever, it adds up really, really quickly. As you can see, our barbarian is actually literally at negative 17 hit points. And we only get through by the skin of our teeth. Now, kind of a comical thing happens here. The combat ends. He falls unconscious. Immediately gets back up. If that is not the most barbarian thing I've seen today, I don't know what else is. But yeah, really tough fight. And this is when I decide, you know what? We need to go back. We need to rest up. We need to start taking the game more seriously. We need to respect it, respect the enemies that we're going up against, and actually prepare ourselves properly instead of just relying on the party-wide buffs that we cast all the time. Because that was a really, really rough fight for us. And obviously we can't do fights like that all the time because we'll end up losing the run. So yeah, so here I just kind of back up, I take a step back, and I look at what's going on, and I'm like, all right, we need to rest, we need to get ready. Now, as far as deciding whether or not to rest every floor, I think it's going to come down to your personal preference as far as whether or not you want to do that all the time. Because the thing is, if you go into a floor and you rest immediately before scouting out what the enemies look like and stuff like that, you can often run into a situation where, like, you've already rested, and you can't actually counter what the enemies are using. So you can't actually counter like the acid damage and stuff like that, just because you've already spent that resource. You've already used that one-time rest. When it would be more useful to you in a situation like this, where we kind of know what we're going up against. We know that this is an acid floor now. So what we're going to do is actually cast like a communal resist acid spell. And of course, we have another obligatory casting session. Now the thing is, I have a long buff casting period for this party. But that's because that's how we built it by design. We have a ton of physical damage dealers who really benefit from having these advantages. And as you can see, if you build a party like this, it really helps to streamline that process for you of actually casting those buffs on people. You know, getting the right hotkeys, knowing what spells you have. It's a lot of work, but I mean that's how you win the game. So I make a mistake here and I accidentally cast Heroism on my Druid, which is kind of funny, because obviously she doesn't really need it. She just throws like 2 javelins every round. You know, at most it's going to deal like 12 damage or something. Just not really worth the effort of doing that. The Druid obviously is more of a support character in this run specifically. Doesn't have to be though. Druid can certainly be a decent frontline character. Although again, the way the game is balanced, it's still not going to be better than, you know, a well-optimized, well-played fighter or barbarian. And now we get to test our animal growth. It's supposed to double the size of the creature that you cast it on, but I don't think it doesn't actually seem to do that if your creatures are already large. So, which honestly though is kind of a good thing. Just because if they were any bigger, they'd have issues fitting into the room, kind of like the dragon did. And speaking of that, part of the reason we had such trouble with that fight is because I was paying more attention to the dragon. And wow, I didn't realize that boar actually has 41 strength, and the bear has 37. That's just impressive. That's just so much, and it's so much damage. And you look at that boar's doing 32 to 39. And it gets 2 attacks around. I mean, that's just so strong. So strong. So even though the Druid herself is not fighting in this run for us, it doesn't really matter all that much. Just because the animal companions are really doing the bulk of the work here. Now again, I would love for there to be like a buff, like macro key, like you can bind casting buffs onto certain characters and stuff to like a single button press, so that you don't have to like spend a minute remembering all your buffs and casting things. Because like I frequently forget when I'm doing these kinds of runs, like that I need to cast buffs on all my characters. Like I'll forget that like my paladin needs to do his blessed weapon, my druid needs to cast like magic fang, my sorcerer needs to cast heroism on everybody and stuff like that. It can be really difficult to remember, especially in this mode where you don't have like as much time with the party as you do in like the regular campaign, for example. And so that aspect of it can be really difficult. I realized that I hadn't cast heroism on my ranger yet, and now the thing is, he's only got a plus 17 to hit at 10th level, only plus 17. But the thing is, he's also using rapid shot and deadly aim. So really, he's got like a base of like a plus 22 to hit or so. So if we did end up fighting enemies with really high AC, that would be a concern for us. Thankfully, nice thing about fighting animals is that they often don't have a lot of AC. Our animal companions, of course, are an exception because we have things like mage armor, animal growth, stuff like that, where we just have a lot of options. Now, important tactical decision here, and I recommend when you play, always turn the auto pause to be on if new enemies show up, because here's what could have happened in this fight, right? I could have sent all my frontliners to go fight that owlbear, right? Owlbears are a big threat. The alpha warg is over there. But then what would have happened is this Dwemer Hodag and this Hydra would have come directly for my archer, my sorceress, and my druid. And that could have been like a complete disaster, right? Now, thankfully for us, all the enemies happen to be in a fireball formation for us, so we cast a controlled fireball. Controlled fireball is kind of a contentious spell, I think, because you don't know if like you actually need it a lot of the time. Like, if we wanted to just use a 3rd level fireball instead, the nice thing about it is that we could just target it in the back of this party here. But the thing is, the radiuses can be kind of finicky in this game, and there's nothing worse than casting like an empowered fireball and then hitting your own team with it. That's just so like awful to feel. So, like when one of your characters loses like 70 hit points because of friendly fire, that's kind of the last thing you want. As a result, I actually think Controlled Fireball is a very good spell for peace of mind. It really helps in the heat of battle because things change so rapidly in Kingmaker, like in battle, that like if you make you may make a mistake without realizing it, because like maybe you cast Fireball at a certain location, your fighter kills that enemy, and you don't pause in time before the Fireball gets cast. And that means that you're just screwed at that point. Like, there's nothing you can do because the fireball is going to hit. It's going to do a lot of damage. It may even kill your own party member. And that's always like the worst feeling when that happens. Now, remember that our barbarian has Great Cleave, and I put it on even though we aren't really using it yet, just because it is a very useful spell. And finally, because we're fighting a boss enemy here, I do summon a couple of dire boars. And they'll actually be useful in the next fight, since we kill this group so quickly. Now again, see, this fight was actually harder than the other one we went up against, the one where a lot of our allies went down. But the reason we did so much better in this fight is because we were prepared, we had better positioning, and we were casting spells when they needed to be cast. And that really is like the kind of the crux of the tactical side of Kingmaker, is just understanding where you need to be at a certain time, having the right buffs. Acid resistance in this case is pretty huge for us, and just really, just having that sense of mind and having the patience to understand where you need to deploy your characters. And I think it's brilliant, right? Because like most people look at a role-playing game like this and they're like, oh yeah, just spam the most overpowered thing and win, right? And in Kingmaker, I think it's a lot more nuanced than that. I think it's just a very good, like, solid tactical RPG, which is great. A lot of people have a stigma about this game against things like min-maxing, for example, or like trying to build good characters in general. That like if it's not organic, it's not D&D, like that sort of thing. And like, I feel like Pathfinder was really designed with that balance in mind and with this depth of like character in mind. Always be careful when you see rooms like this, by the way, because what immediately happens is I know in the back of my head there's stuff past that statue. And you'll notice that the auto pause kicks off, and sure enough, right, here's a bullet, here's a Hydra, here's an owlbear. And so, again, we have to kind of split our forces here. And the thing is, when you get into these kinds of rooms with a 4-person party, you need to have ways to deal with flanking attacks, and you need to have ways of dealing with large groups of enemies. So in a 4-person party with like a wizard, for example, a way we would get around this is summoning would be a huge benefit here. We actually have 2 summon boars that are going to be helping out in this fight for sure. So having those summons and then having spells that literally just like incapacitate enemies, right? So like paralysis, sleep, stuff like that is extremely useful here as well for that specific reason. Just being able to kind of control the pace of the battle, make the fights more and like numerically right on your side. And as a result of how we were able to handle that fight, it went by very, very quickly, very cleanly. No skin off our back, necessarily. The only resources we're really spending are the ones we spent anyway. I kind of check around here. I forget that there's a door in the other room for a second. So obviously we want to go back to that once I find it. Now, if you guys want to see a particular class in future runs, because the thing is, after this run, we're going to start playing on challenging. It's just going to happen. I think it's the way the game's meant to be played. I think even this party would run into issues on challenging, just because it is so difficult. Which is the way it's intended to be. Don't get me wrong. Like, it's not like, this is stupid, it's hard. Like, no, I think it's the way that this mode is supposed to be. It's definitely doable because I've completed a challenging run at this point with a 4-person party. So it's not like it's impossible by any stretch of the imagination. But if you want to see a specific character in the upcoming runs, or even just like a character idea, like, let me know and I'll try to put it in. You know, I really do want to have that level of interaction with you guys, especially the people who are watching the episodes for this like day in, day out. I think this Owlcat, one of those enemies was an elite, and Stoneskin really coming through in the clutch for us here as that Owlcat teleports like right next to our casters. Could have been really scary, but we were able to take him out all the same. And yeah, we're just good to go. We're really just, fine with this party. And I forget, do I rest here? I don't think I do, because I think we're about to level up again, if I'm not mistaken. Got some gold, get a Belt of Physical Flow, which is Strength and Dex. Very nice item to just casually find. And it doesn't really help our Ranger necessarily at the moment because, he's got a Dex bonus. But we cleared the floor, and that's what counts. I really am excited to see like what boss we're going to end up fighting, and if we even stand a chance against that boss. The bosses are really, really strong in this game, so I'm very excited to get there. Also, I just want to point out that our light load for this party is 5,000 pounds. I don't even know if that's factoring in the animal companions. I mean, it's got to be, right? But still, that's pretty funny. That's more than most parties have is like their max load, which is just awesome. I realize we have a couple of abilities. We get our sorceress a snazzy new robe there, very snazzy indeed. Allows us to cast a Phantasmal Killer once a day, always nice. And I also forgot that our sorceress had a greater invisibility spell she can cast once per day as a part of her class, so oopsie daisies on that. Then we go ahead and head down to the next floor. And then this is more or less the end of the episode. We just go ahead and grab some levels here on our characters. Yeah, just bump up the skills. I grab Cleaving Finish on our Barbarian, which is very nice. Allows us to just do like an extra attack every round. And then for the rest of the characters, I don't think anything particularly interesting happened during their level up, but I'll go ahead and show it anyway. I think we grab Improved Critical on our Archer. I forget if we already did that. We'll get there when we get there. Anyway, we pick this Deadly Accuracy Rage Power, since it'll double our like attack bonus while critting. Just very strong for that reason. Because the thing is, when you think about it, like having, I think it's called like Critical Focus. It gives you like a +4 to confirming critical hits, and the reason that that's so useful is just because it makes your crit chance, when you think about it, like much more likely. Just because that way, whenever you threaten a critical hit, you also have a really high chance of confirming it, and so it just really improves your damage output from round to round. We're talking a difference of like, you know, if we go from like having like a 4% chance to crit at like first level, all the way up to like a 15 to 20% chance to crit every round. Later on, even higher than that for certain weapon types and builds, like Scimitar and Falchion builds with improved critical are really strong for that reason, just because you get that extra crit bonus, which can be really powerful. We pick up the Quarry ability. I'll need to remember to use this. Um, Even though it is a standard action to use, but I mean, a +2 to hit is nothing to sneeze at. You know, any bonus you can get to hit should always be considered an advantage, just because, you know, if you can't hit them, you're not going to do damage in the first place. Now that being said, feats like power attack and stuff like that, well, that's a discussion for a video that isn't about to end. But anyway, we pick up a level on our sorcerers, and that's more or less the episode for now. I forget how there's even another 3 minutes on this, to be honest. But for the most part, we just pick out another spell. But I'll have to remember that. I'll have to talk about power attack and deadly aim and rapid shot and things where you're trading attack bonus for damage, and whether or not those are effective, and if so, like what builds and stuff like that. Anyway, we end up picking 4 spells here. I think I go with False Life just because getting bonus hit points is useful pretty much regardless of what level you're at. Having more HP is always nice, especially on a class like Sorcerer that doesn't get a lot of HP in the first place. We pick up Slow because we do have Transmutation Focus, which means that it's a lot harder to resist. And then for 4th level spells, I think we just pick up Greater False Life. And then at 5th level, we pick up Baleful Polymorph, which lets us turn our enemies into like cute fluffy bunnies and stuff like that, more or less. Reason for that being, like I said, crowd control. It's what it's all about here, is just keeping the enemy subdued so that your damage dealers can do their jobs. You know, at this point it's kind of RPG 101, but in Pathfinder it can be really useful to know what that actually looks like and how it works. And in this case, for this party, it's going to be Baleful Polymorph, for sure. Yeah, I do some deliberation here because there are a lot of good spells, and it's tough when you're choosing, like, for sorcerers, what spells to do, because it's a spell that you need to be able to cast a lot, right? Because you're going to have to, because you only get a couple of spells. Whereas wizards, it's like, you know, you have a lot of, like, one and done spells. You know, you have a really large toolbox to work with, which is always really interesting to play. I think that in general, wizards take a lot more skill to play than sorcerers, just because sorcerers you can kind of spam the same couple of spells. Granted, if you pick crap spells, then the sorcerer's going to be a lot worse than a wizard, but I digress. Anyway, we pick out that spell, and that's more or less going to be the end of this episode. So thank you guys for watching. I apologize for once again forgetting to do the audio, but at least I didn't upload it this time. I managed to get the post in before uploading an accident to YouTube. So thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the episode, and I'll see you guys on the next one.